And we're back here today talking Season 1, Episode 3, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Power Broker episode. We got a lot of stuff going on this episode between the return of Ayo at the end. We had Sharon Carter being a badass, Zemo's dance moves. A lot to get into here today. And we got a stacked panel as always. BR_Dr. Chris Mueller on the Twitter machine. Chris, what's going on, dude?
Not much. This is going to be a good one.
This is going to be a good one. You tweeted me, or you tweeted all of us in the DM yesterday. This was an awesome episode. I didn't get a chance to watch it until later on Friday, but it was well worth the wait. I was very happy with what I saw. We'll get into all of it. Phil, you're here as well. Phil DL616 on the Twitter machine. Phil, welcome back, my man.
Good. How are you?
Doing great. And Jeff, this is your first time here on the Falcon and Winter Soldier review series. We haven't talked to you since the WandaVision stuff several weeks ago, but you're on the Twitter machine at JeffJSays. Jeff, welcome on, man.
What's up, everybody? Glad to be back and glad to talk about this series.
And for full disclosure, we literally just got done doing a 35-minute rant on the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which I wish we got in recording, like Chris said. Not a big deal, because we discussed it a few weeks ago here at the end. I was going to talk about Godzilla and Kong, but you and Phil have not yet seen it. But maybe another time we'll get to that, because it was
yes, sir.
That was great stuff, too. But let's get into it. Jeff, I'll start with you, because we have not yet spoke to you about this show. And before we started recording here, we're going off about everything else. We haven't gotten your thoughts on the show itself yet, so we're 3 episodes in. We'll discuss this episode in particular in a moment, but just overall, what have your thoughts on the show been?
I think it's been really, really dope, man. It's fulfilled what I wanted, was the continuation of Bucky and future Captain America's story. You know what I'm saying? As they go on and really grapple with this idea that the symbol of hope, really of America and of the superhero world needs to be replaced, but who is going to do it and what that burden is. I'm a fan. Captain America is probably my favorite superhero trilogy, and I'm a fan of everything espionage and secret agent and fight scenes and all of that. I'm a super fan of that. So seeing it on Disney Plus, seeing it with Falcon and Winter Soldier, I'm really interested. And also, as someone who loved Nick Spencer's run on Sam Wilson Captain America, Steve Rogers Captain America, and the Secret Empire storyline, which is what this is based off of loosely, I've been waiting for years for the Nick Spencer apology form to be properly distributed, filled out, and submitted to that man for the foundation for what he created. Because when this series is over, a lot of people are going to have to do some Division 1 DB backpedaling on their previous thoughts on that series. But yeah, I think it's been really good, and I love how they subtly tie to things in this Marvel Cinematic Universe, because this is what comic books are. There's worlds that occur outside of the books that you're reading that do have an effect on the books that you're reading, and they don't ignore it. They acknowledge it, and depending, of course, on who's writing, they may be directly involved or indirectly involved, right? So this is what they've built, which is something that's it's astonishing to really think of how 10 plus years, over a decade of world building has led to fans watching these series, expecting them to tie into others, or getting nods to locations and people and places in books that we know, and we automatically tie them to what they could be or where they could fit in the greater cinematic universe. I just think it was a undertaking, but it's paying off now in the subtle ways they can tell the stories.
Yeah, and I think having the TV show format, too, really allows for them to really dive deeper into a lot of this stuff, because I feel like if this was a movie or a mini-movie or whatever, because it's only a 6-part show, unlike WandaVision, which was 9 episodes, but if this was a movie, I feel like we wouldn't be able to get all the different characters and flesh out these characters as much as they have so far. Not only Falcon and Winter Soldier themselves, but, again, in this episode alone, we got Sharon Carter, Zemo's back, Ayo at the end as well, her return at the very end of the episode. So I think so far the TV format between what we saw in WandaVision and this show has paid off amazingly well for Marvel, and we haven't even gotten into Loki, What If, and all the other shows they have planned for the next seemingly decade. But we're only 3 episodes in. The show is already halfway over, which is kind of sad because it's been great so far. But I think it's safe to say this was the best episode yet. So, Chris, you had a lot of positive things to say about this episode. Can you break down why exactly it was awesome in your opinion?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. This episode covered a ton of ground, but I think my personal favorite part of the whole episode might have just been Zemo dancing in the club.
The gifts to come out of this episode, yeah.
That is the gift that keeps on giving. But, I mean, let's just start at the beginning, man. That commercial for the Global Repatriation Council, that is some propaganda if I have ever seen it. But I love how it was juxtaposed with a military van immediately pulling up with that logo and a bunch of soldiers all armed to the teeth getting out. Mm-hmm. And then we get this scene with New Cap going in and busting up a little internet cafe, and immediately the first thing that came to my mind is he has to call over Lamar to translate for him, which kind of just tells me Lamar is more qualified. Yeah, I felt like that was a very sly thing that they threw in there. Like, we're going to just establish that Lamar might actually be smarter and more worldly than Cap. Mm-hmm. But he freaked out on that guy, man. Like, when he screamed, "Do you know who I am?" in his face, and looked like he was going to jam the shield through his head or something. Yeah. And then when he got outside, there's that close-up of his face, and he just looks like he's about to have a breakdown. And I really think this is leading to him and maybe Lamar getting in bed with the power broker and getting their powers this way. I know we had kind of speculated a little bit that maybe he has powers and he's hiding them, but now I'm starting to think that he's going to get desperate because he can't keep up with Bucky and Falcon. Like, they're 2 steps ahead of him. So he's going to want to try and even the playing field.
Yeah, kind of going off that, Phil, you've been saying since day one that John Walker and Lamar have just been the bad guys from the get-go. Maybe not the top villains of the show, but there's definitely something going up with those guys. After what we saw in this episode, that's got to further solidify your theory, right?
Yeah, I mean, we saw Walker go full Rappaport here, and, jap out on my guy. I mean,
oh my God. You really don't want this podcast to start. You really don't want this podcast to start. But go ahead, Phil Cook. Go ahead.
I mean, we saw him get in my man's face, and I just feel like, I don't know, man. I feel like this goes back to what I've said all along about how John isn't what we think he is. And just the fact that I had to go back, this episode, when he went in there and he got out of the GRC van, right? And I was like, wait, is he tied to GRC? So I had to go back and look at stuff from the first episode and the second episode, and he is. So I was like, that makes me think, like, what's going on with GRC? What is the behind the scenes with this? And I definitely think he knows more than he's putting on. Yeah. Especially like with GRC's connection to Carly. Like, there's something there. Like, he knows more than he's saying. And I might be off in that, he might not already know the power broker. He might not already have abilities, but he definitely is connected in some way.
Yeah, the power broker was obviously the main topic of this episode, along with everything else going on. That seems to be like it's going to be the big reveal of the show. I'm not sure if it's going to be like a huge reveal. I don't want to get our hopes up too much after what went down with WandaVision and all the fan theories that surrounded that. But what about you, Jeff? What were your theories and thoughts on the whole power broker thing? Where do you think that storyline's leading, and who could be behind it?
So it's funny. My guy Michael Ford, he was doing a thread on Twitter, and he was asking folks he would rate the boldest predictions that people had for Falcon and the Winter Soldier, just based on the level of audacity, not whether or not it's feasible, but what could they do, right? So I was thinking about it, and I said, what if the power broker isn't the person that's dealing out these super soldier serums and isn't behind it, but what if it's Hydra Cap?
Okay.
Which I do not think, and I say it, I'm not going into the theory hive. I don't think it's going to happen. But that would be like the boldest thing. I'm less familiar with the Power Broker. I've probably seen him. He's probably like one of those people like you've seen in a story before and unless you went back and like read stories specifically with him as like the main villain or whatever, you wouldn't really know who he is. But given who he is, I think that he may either be the person that's moving the strings, or he may be the person who ends up giving John Walker his powers. Or enhancing him in some way so that he can be a better Cap or eventually become U.S. agent or whatever have you. So I could see that for sure.
When you say Hydra involvement, do you mean, or could it potentially mean the involvement of someone like a Red Skull return? They name-dropped him on this episode, and usually that stuff is done for a reason. Could it be a Zola-involved thing? I don't know what his status is. Obviously, we saw him back in Winter Soldier, and he was taken offline, or seemingly. I mean, they could always write him back in somehow. Do you see, like, a notable face being behind that, or just Hydra just in general?
No, when I say Hydra Cap, I'm talking about the evil Steve Rogers.
Oh, okay.
Another. So we're getting into this whole multiverse era. So I could see a world where that happens, but it may take away from the grounded nature of Falcon and the Winter Soldier if that came out of nowhere, right? But I Hydra's always there. Even if you don't see them, that's why they're Hydra. So I would never put it past Hydra to be involved somehow. But I do think this is more so black market drugs. Like if you've read the books, there's MGH, the mutant growth hormone that's you're supposed to inject yourself and automatically get powers. It's kind of like the Jamie Foxx movie that dropped on Netflix. That you take the shot for an hour and you get some type of power and you don't know what it is, and it could kill you. And so this idea of performance enhancing drugs that give you powers has been around for a while. So I think and even introducing Madripoor into the MCU, literally anything can happen. It's Vegas with supervillains.
Go ahead, Phil.
There's so much stuff in the Madripoor scenes. Like, if you read the comics, there's so many references to comic stuff in there. Like,
Wolverine's bar was just straight up shown.
Yeah, the Princess Bar is there. I mean, the bar they went in, I think, is the Bronze Monkey, right? And that's a bar right out of the comics.
Yeah, and then Selby, who in the comics, I believe, is normally a black man, was played by a British white woman. That was kind of weird.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with. If it's
supposed to be the same Selby. No, that was like a Wikipedia thing. Like, I just looked up the name Selby and came across some stuff, and it's like, okay, well, tied to Madripoor a little bit, very heavily dealing with the X-Men. I think Selby's power is that they can communicate with machine code. But obviously, we didn't see anything about that in here. But I got two crazy theories, just because you were talking about like bold theories people could throw out. What if Zemo is pulling a Kaiser Soze and he's the power broker?
Well,
oh wow.
Because here's the thing: Zemo, super rich. We just established that. Literal baron. But on top of that, he had multiple opportunities to run away from Sam and Falcon, or Sam and Bucky, and didn't. Kept coming back to him. I think he's doing that to ingratiate himself and build a little bit of trust to get their guard down. Whether that means he's the power broker or he has something else cooking later on, I don't know. But he also shot the dude making the serum in the chest. Like, is that just because he doesn't want more super soldiers, or is it because there's another reason at play that, I don't know. But the other thing is Sharon, after she leaves them, gets in a car and she's like, we have a couple of big problems. It's like, what's she talking about, Bucky and Sam? Like, is she the power broker? She has all this crazy, like, fine art at her disposal. She could have built up some wealth in all those years that she was in hiding. Like, what if she did a heel turn?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing with the Zemo thing, like Zemo's whole outlook goes against being the power broker. That's the only reason why I wouldn't see it. But man, it could be anyone. I mean, it could be Zola. I definitely noticed green screens in this episode a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like there were a few times where I was like, okay, that's got to be intentional because we've seen more than one green screen on this episode.
It's possible.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so many things that could be happening.
I feel like Zola's like the Mephisto of this show, where it's not very likely, but people are going to speculate it anyway. So we'll see. I'm not getting my hopes up for anything, but I mean, those are a lot of good theories. Going back to Zemo for a second, because I was confused by this, and maybe you guys can shed some light on this. How did he get so wealthy? Because he wasn't wealthy in Civil War, was he?
Well, he was.
He's a baron.
He was royalty.
Oh, okay. He was royalty even at that point? I didn't know that.
Yeah, see, in that movie, they never specified that he was a literal baron. They said he was like special ops in the military, but it's not uncommon for royalty to serve in the military, just like Prince William and Prince Harry did.
Gotcha.
So it's very possible that, they omitted that, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what? It's more fun if he's a rich guy with a private jet and a sassy butler. Like, let's just do it.
The butler. Yeah, I thought his name was literally Baron, like Baron Corbin. I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't think that was like, and there was any connection there. I thought that was just his actual name. So now that you say that, it just makes a lot more sense.
Oh my God, give Baron Corbin a purple ski mask. New gimmick.
So going to the ski mask too, I know obviously that's from the comics, but from a storyline standpoint in the show, when he's grabbing the shit from the car, why does that stand out to him as something that he would want to pick up and wear?
Because my guess is at this point he's a fugitive, and so he's going to want to try and cover his face because eventually he's working with Sam and Bucky at this point, but he's eventually going to take off. He's not going to keep working with them.
Okay,
he's going to take off and go into hiding at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I don't think that I can't remember. I haven't seen it in a while, but I don't think he ever wore that in the Cap series. Right, he never wore the purple mask, did he?
And what, in the movies?
In the movies, yeah.
No.
He never did, right? So this is showing that evolution to becoming like Baron Zemo, to where you think that that's just his name and not the fact that he's a baron. You know what I mean?
Do you think they'll go the route in the comics of having the mask get stuck to his face permanently?
It depends on what they want to do with Doctor Doom. I think if you want to have two of those same type of characters, I think it's cool if he just if he is wearing the mask. But then it begs the question: maybe if we're throwing theories around, right? Maybe he does eventually break off from them, or he gets captured by the government and is charged with running the Thunderbolts program.
Yeah,
because you see that they're starting to let villains live. Because before, if you were cast as a villain, you were out of here. So now the lower level villains are still kind of around. So I could see it eventually going to him leading the Thunderbolts, depending on what they do with villains throughout the series. And they can build it up on Disney Plus, right? Mm-hmm. They can build it up on Disney Plus. Have these villains, they get captured or whatever. Because the Thunderbolts are more or less the MCU's or the Marvel Suicide Squad, more or less, right? It's like they're more so of a actual reformation program and not run Black Ops or we're going to kill you anyway. It's actually more of trying to be restorative to it with having like a quote unquote former villain. But Baron's Zemo's place in the MCU, where he's pretty much a oligarch who has his own vision, who may be in that gray area of quote-unquote villain hero, right? He may be in that gray area of just chaotic neutral, more or less, right? And they could get him to run that program if that's where it goes eventually.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the Thunderbolt stuff, because I'm surprised we haven't talked about this when we were talking about the Power Broker, just because I was thinking about it when I was watching this episode. And I'm pretty sure we've mentioned it before, Chris, Phil, and I, when we were discussing either last week or the week before, because you see his name in the credits. Is there a chance that Thunderbolt Ross that Thaddeus Ross could be tied to the power broker stuff, that it even shows up in the show at all. Obviously, they're talking a lot about the super serum, the soldier serum, whatever. He had something to do with that a little bit with the original Hulk movie, and Abomination 2 we know is coming back in the She-Hulk show, I'm pretty sure, in a little while from now. Any chance that he ties in any of this at all?
I mean, he could easily show up. He could be part of the GRC management stuff. I mean, we saw Rhodey earlier, so if he's, as long as he's still tied to the military in some way, and the actor's alive, Ross can show up at any time. He's kind of, he's chaotic neutral, so he's like, you can use him for anything at any time. He can either show up to help the good guys or the bad guys and sort of fit in.
Yeah, well, do you think he might make that full-on heel turn at some point, or do you think, in this show specifically, just because I think he's already confirmed to appear, he was in the trailer for Black Widow, so it might be weird, I guess, if they were to make the full-blown heel turn with him on this show, only to show up in a different role. I know that takes place like 5 years ago with the Black Widow movie that's confirmed to come out this summer.
Yeah, I don't know. It would just be cool to see him show up. I don't need him to make a full heel turn. Like, in my eyes, he's more interesting if he's just the government dickhead, because that means he can be somebody that they either get along with for a specific purpose or don't.
So you're basically telling me that he's like the government version of Loki, essentially, at this point.
Well, he's sort of like a less personable Coulson. Like, he can just kind of be anywhere, and he can either be a help or a hindrance, but people don't like him as much as they liked Coulson, obviously. And speaking of Coulson, I didn't even know this until I watched a little video earlier. The lady who played Selby was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as one of the doctors working on Coulson in Project Tahiti.
Wow. Oh, that's nuts. That's a wild, deep cut.
Marvel has this weird habit of casting people in double roles, like almost accidentally, because you had the same woman from Luke Cage in Civil War, and then you have the woman who makes out with Cap in Cap 1, also playing Star-Lord's mother. So it's just this weird thing that keeps happening in Marvel that kind of makes me laugh.
Yeah, or Mahershala Ali wasn't a Luke Cage show, and he's going to be Blade.
Yeah, it feels like they're really just at this point saying the Netflix stuff doesn't count, because there's a couple of specific names from the Punisher show that seem to be showing up, like the last name Madani, which was the woman who died in this episode of tuberculosis that Carly was visiting. That's the same last name as the female police officer from The Punisher.
Right. Yeah, I think they're gonna. I think with the Netflix stuff, they're pretty much gonna treat it like it's its own multiverse, like its own universe where these things happened. And yeah, that's why the guy who Cottonmouth in Netflix would be Luke Cage. But you see that when you've already built up the reputation and built your world so that you can make those seamless transitions. Like, I don't think if like Michael Coulter couldn't be Blade because he was Luke Cage, that would cause a little bit of confusion. But Mahershala, first of all, Mahershala is Mahershala, so it's like whatever we gotta do to make this happen, we're gonna make it happen. But the fact that he was Cottonmouth and then he goes into being Blade, there's been enough time between that series and the fact that the series fans clearly know it is not MCU, it's fine. But if they get I'm blanking on his name. The brother who played, I was about to say Matt Murdock, but the real life Charlie Cox who played Daredevil. If he becomes Daredevil in the MCU, there won't be any confusion because it's like, okay, they just brought that Daredevil to the MCU, and maybe in the MCU they're the same person. You get what I'm saying? Just like in multiverses, you could have multiple people with the same name, but they may or may not look alike, or they may not be the same gender or whatever. Yeah. So,
they'll establish that Andrew Garfield's movies take place in the Netflix universe, and that's their Daredevil. And he just gets pulled in during Spider-Man 3, and he's like, you know what? I like this New York better.
Right, I'll just stay for a while.
Another thing I wanted to bring up to you guys, this is kind of off the topic of this episode specifically, but we're talking about like who the power broker could be and stuff like that. So I don't know if you guys saw this, but in an interview, I think it was with Rotten Tomatoes, the director of the show, the producer of the show, I forgot who exactly it was, had said that come episode 5, this was episode 3, come episode 5 in 2 weeks, there's supposed to be some sort of surprise cameo that they said they would like to see team up with Thor at some point or something along those lines. We're going down the WandaVision route again of, just wild fan theories, people getting their hopes up way too much. But
Vader Bill confirmed. No, I'm just kidding.
Just to entertain the idea, we'll go around the horn here. Chris, I'll start with you. Who do you think this could be? Do you know what I'm talking? Did you see the clip, or like, what do you think this could be referring to?
I don't know what you're talking about, but if they're talking about somebody that they want to see team up with Thor, if this is a real thing and it's not another Paul Bettany thing where he's like, I've wanted to work with myself since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
As long as it's not that, then I mean the possibilities are endless. There's so many established characters that haven't done much with Thor, other than maybe appear on the same battlefield during one of the big Avengers fight sequences. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, just because they had to do so many late reshoots for this after they were done with WandaVision, they're bringing in Wakandans now. Maybe we get to see White Vision show up for some reason.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I was thinking about that. Do you think this could be their way of tying in WandaVision with Falcon and Winter Soldier and maybe even potentially, I don't know, somehow, Black Widow too? I've heard some rumors that might be tied in somehow, some way.
I mean, maybe it'll be Florence Pugh playing Yelena Belova.
Maybe. I feel like she'd fit the theme of the show perfectly. Of all the stuff they have coming out, I think that'd be a great way to segue her in. The unfortunate part is that this is out in episode 5 or whatever it is. The whole show is going to be done by like this month, within the next couple of weeks. And Black Widow doesn't come out until the summer, so it would be weird, but it's possible. What about you, Phil? I guess they had said it was some sort of like grounded character. I don't know. I got to go back and read the quote. But I feel like they wouldn't be saying this unless... I know the Paul Bettany thing, where they just fucked us over with that completely. It was supposed to be a joke, but do you have any idea who this big cameo could be?
If it's a ground level character, and I'm just thinking Thor, maybe it has some kind of connection to Power Broker. So maybe they get their powers through Power Broker. I don't know, man. There's like a ton of. That's a tough one. I mean, I could see them doing something with like Blue Marvel at some point. That would be cool. I don't know if that fits with Thor, though. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was a weird thing. If you go back and listen to the quote, he was like, it's someone that I think could work well alongside someone such as Thor at some point. I know, obviously, it sounded like it's a smaller character, but he would like to see him work with the bigger characters at some point. Maybe just the dynamic of the two being together. Again, I don't know what that was exactly supposed to refer to, but what about you, Jeff? Go ahead, Chris.
If it's Thor's roommate from those short videos, nothing would make me happier. That would be on the Ralph Boner level of trolling, and I would love it.
I hope they don't go the trolling route again after WandaVision just wrapped up. But what about you, Jeff? Do you see some sort of big cameo in the show, or do you think it's going to be more smaller people like a Sharon Carter or an AO who came back on this episode and people like that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, people trolled themselves. I've never seen fans work themselves into a shoot the way they did with WandaVision. Like, it was classic working yourself into a shoot. And Paul Bettany, it's almost like he told us without telling us. He's like, I really like this guy. Like, when he was going on, and then when somebody had suggested maybe it's him, I was like, oh, that would be awesome. And it was. But it's two people I could think of. And when they say they want him to, they would love to see him hang out with Thor, right? The first, I would say, if we're going the power broker route and people are getting powers and blah, 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 I would say maybe, if I want to think wild, maybe the Sentry.
The Sentry would be nuts.
Right. Like, that's like completely there is no box. I'm not even thinking outside the box. There is no box, right? So that would be like the Sentry, right? But if I think about a character, and once again, if he did show up, then, what I'm saying is moot. But Rick Jones has always been a character Marvel associated either with Thor or with the Avengers, and just a guy who falls into powers and is always around, is always doing some type of secret mission. Maybe him. I don't know if I had to think about the cameo, but I think it's going to be someone. If there is a cameo, I think it's going to be something cool. Yeah. But I don't know if it's going to be mind blowing. I would just caution people to just enjoy the ride, enjoy the show, and whatever you get, it's cool. But do not work yourself into a shoot, because you're going to be upset and it's going to be all your fault.
I know you mentioned before, Jeff, that the Evil Cap storyline or the Hydra Cap and how we could kind of factor into the show. I forgot to ask you at the beginning. We've talked about this a lot since we started doing these reviews. Do you think we could see just normal, regular old Cap in the show at some point, or do you think it kind of means more that they reference him, but we don't actually see him at all?
I think you could go either way, right? If he comes back, if old Cap comes back again, he can't come back to have the same conversation with Falcon again. Right, like then it cheapens it to me, right? Because we also don't know where he went. He's just in the wind. He didn't die. He's just in the wind. He's just old now. You know what I mean? He's in the wind, and they're saying that he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So real quick, you remember when soon to be Falcon Torres was talking to Sam about, do you have a man on the moon?
Yeah.
It reminded me of the storyline with the old Nick Fury, who ends up being like a watcher because he gets something happen. I forget what happens, but he ends up being chained up at the moon, and like it was like punishment for killing the Watcher. He was the guy who killed the Watcher, and then he ended up having to be in the moon, chained up and seeing everything. That's like a deep cut Marvel. It was in recent times, but it just makes me think: what if Cap is on the moon surveying stuff, or whatever? But yeah, I think what's going to be more interesting to me is what Bucky wants to do, because he mentions it to Sam that he's going to take the shield back and become Captain America since Falcon gave it up.
Yeah. And
that ties back to the Brubaker run, where Winter Soldier becomes Captain America, where Bucky becomes Captain America. So he's teasing to that right now. Like, okay, Steve passed down the shield to you. You didn't want it. We know this guy, John Walker, shouldn't be it. So I'm going to be Captain America, not because I want to, but because if there's going to be a symbol, it can't be him. So it needs to be somebody who's close to Steve and who knows what to do with it, right? Because even with the way this Captain America looks, he's low key biting from Bucky's makeup, because Bucky was the Captain America with a gun on his holster. He had a gun holster, and he had the shield, and that's how he was running around. So now that John Walker is doing it, it's kind of wild to me.
Yeah, no, there's just so many possibilities. I mean, obviously things I'm not even thinking of because you guys are way more familiar with the comics than I am. But like you said, though, Jeff, I think it is smart to not get too excited about it and just to temper your expectations, just because obviously we saw what happened with WandaVision and just the classic case of people working themselves into a shoot, myself included. And the timing worked wonderfully, too, to tie back into wrestling, because I know when Chris, Phil, and I were talking about that episode dropped literally the same weekend as Revolution, when AEW was promoting that big, like, Hall of Fame signee. So, like, everyone, we thought it was Brock or it was CM Punk or whatever, so it was just a great weekend of fan theories. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways that it can go. And the fact that it's in episode 5 of all things, he was very specific to say episode 5. So there's 6 episodes, so that is a little weird. We'll see where that goes. But a couple more things before we wind down here. Let's talk about Sharon Carter for a second. We really haven't talked about her a whole lot. We haven't seen her since Civil War. I think it was the last time that we had seen her in the MCU. She was badass as fuck on this episode, so let's talk about her a little bit. Chris, what were your initial impressions of Sharon Carter, and if she doesn't turn out to be the power broker, which was the theory we tossed around, what do you see her future being in the MCU after this episode?
Well, first off, just watching her eat through those soldiers like they were tinfoil was awesome. Those fight scenes were great. But I'm just very curious, like, she just happens to be hanging out in the bar that they show up in Madripoor. That seems a little too coincidental. Who shot Selby? We didn't really establish that. Was it Sharon? Because she acted like she was mad that Selby was dead. Or did Zemo have somebody waiting outside to do it? Like, they really never touched on that. Like, where'd that bullet come from? Who shot it? Why? We have no idea, because it jumps into chaos from there, and then they have to escape. Which, by the way, one of the things that made me laugh out loud from this episode was Sam yelling, "I can't run in these heels."
Oh man,
but, my God, that outfit they had him in. And then the picture of literally just Anthony Mackie with more facial hair.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
As Smiling Tiger.
Loud.
Oh man,
so
you're thinking in your head, you're like, oh man, is Zemo racist and just thinking every black guy is gonna look the same and all white people are gonna think that? And then you see the picture, you're like, oh shit, that's just Anthony Mackie in a different suit.
Oh man, so there's two things here. So Smiling Tiger, that's the code name he was using, right? Is an actual villain in the comics, right?
Yeah.
But when I was watching this scene, I was like, are they like winking at the Snap Wilson character? Like, that's totally what I thought here when he was like, I look like a pimp. And Snap Wilson is like, at one point in the comics, that was Sam's backstory when he wasn't Falcon, that he was like a Huggy Bear-esque character that's like a street guy, and he dressed like a pimp. They never actually said he was a pimp, but that's how he dressed. And so I was like, is that a nod to Snap Wilson without actually doing the Snap Wilson stuff?
Maybe.
And then the other thing that was funny about it, too, is when he said it, and then Zemo drops the line of only Americans would think that, you know, a fashion-forward black man would be a criminal. And I was like, you can tell a black man writes the show. Every time I watch the show, I'm like, you can tell that a black man is behind the creative of the show. There's so many lines in the show that you can tell that have their nod. It's almost kind of like when you watch Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, and you can tell the episodes that Dwayne McDuffie was behind.
Yeah, that was pretty evident in the first two episodes too. So, you know, I totally agree. I forgot what I was going to ask you guys. Or sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if you would have told me that Baron Zemo was going to be the intelligent black cultural analyzer on Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you would have had any amount of money I would have bet right now. Like that scene on the plane where they're talking about Marvin Gaye.
Yeah,
and
that was great.
He breaks down why that song is important. And
that was.
And Sam is like, I hate this guy, but he's right.
Yeah. Like, he's like, he's out of line, but he's right. Like, that was so good. That was the best part of that whole exchange with the Trouble Man thing. Where he's just like, you ever heard of it? And he's just like, oh, you don't like Marvin Gaye? Steve loved Marvin Gaye. He's like, I like Marvin Gaye. Those guys. I love the rapport that they have. It's so funny.
And then he was like, but did you actually listen to it? He was like, yeah, no, I listened to it. He was essentially implying that he just didn't love it. And then they just have that whole back and forth, and then like Zemo's adding his 2 cents. that was great. Back to Zemo for a second.
You almost forget. My bad, real quick. You almost forget that Bucky's a 100-year-old. He's a senior citizen. So when you're talking about this type of music, for him, that's probably like how your parents listen to music that you like, and you're like, I get. Is this really music though? And this is like your grandfather saying, maybe even your great grandfather listening to the music you like. So it's just ill when you think.
He even said like, I like music from the 40s.
Yeah.
And then they walk into the one dude's little lab in the shipping yard, and he's playing Mel Torme from the 60s. It's like, oh, this is Bucky's kind of music. He probably enjoys this.
Right.
Back to Zemo for a quick second. Why was it so easy for him to get out of jail? I know this is like a common movie TV trope thing, but like it was incredibly easy for him to get out of there.
So maybe I misread that scene, but I mean, we know that Bucky helped him because he slipped a note to those two guys and started the riot.
Yep.
But did I misread it when he opened the book that he was reading? Was there a key card in there? Is that what that black?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
and I think Bucky spotted that there was a key card in there. Like maybe the book just looked too thick or something. So he asked him about the book to basically tell him like, you're going to have your chance here in a minute.
Yeah. No, I understood all of that, but like that part I understood. But like later on when he takes one of the guards' outfits or whatever, and then he's walking among them, does no one fucking recognize this guy? I mean, he's been there for years and he's a top level criminal.
Well, that's why they caused a disruption, so they're making it seem like nothing else. Like they're worrying about the prison fight. They're worrying about the brawl and not him. That's also why when he pulls the fire alarm and then he dips into a cell while the whole crowd of cops runs by him and then he gets back out. So I think in that part, that was where they showed that was the biggest opportunity for him to get spotted.
Okay.
And that's when he dipped and went back, as opposed to, because you gotta remember, when he stepped out of the cell, everyone was in the mess hall either trying to break up the fight or watching the fight. And so all the guards it was all hands on deck for that. Yeah. So he was able to slip out the first way. Then he created the second diversion where people were going to come right into contact with him. So that's when he dipped out. So I think it was a lot of stuff needed to happen for it to work. And of course, because it's a show, it happened.
I love how when Bucky was recapping it to Falcon, to Sam, he was like, hypothetically, and then Falcon was like, "Oh, what the hell did you do?" And then they showed the recap.
Just immediately called him out. Just knew a second later that he did something.
Didn't he say that in another episode where he was like, "Well, hypothetically, if I did hurt somebody," I thought he had said that in one of the episodes, 1 or 2, but maybe not.
Yeah, but this is the second episode that I feel like the creators basically put in front of us why Bucky cannot be Cap. Because that is a decision that Steve would never make. He would have never helped Zemo get out of jail. Even if he felt like he needed Zemo's help, he wouldn't have done it that way.
And he also wants to shield, and Sam doesn't, immediately making Sam the more honorable of the two.
Exactly. And I feel like they have done very well of painting the differences between Sam and Bucky and why Bucky isn't fit to have the shield. And that doesn't mean that Bucky isn't a hero, but it just means that, just what the shield represents and why Steve worked so hard to be worthy of that is a part of Sam's story. Sam has to get to the point where he feels like he has to continue to work to be worthy of the shield. Mm-hmm. And that's the same reason why John is not fit as well, because he already thinks that he's above fitting into that spot. He already thinks that, well, I am Cap because the government put me in this position. And that's totally not what Steve would do. Steve was totally against government-appointed heroes. He knew that I have to carry this burden because this is something that fell in my lap, and I make the choices that make this symbol worthy. It's kind of a dual thing. Like I have to make myself worthy of carrying the shield, but I also have to make the shield mean something by being the man behind it.
Yeah. And with Bucky, he may not be the next Cap, nor should he be, but there was a lot of implication between this episode and I think the last one too, of him kind of going back to his roots as the White Wolf when he was in Wakanda, and then we saw the return of Ayo at the end. We haven't really discussed that at all. Do you think that's where this is going? And I like the fact this is all tying in too, because obviously they're working with Zemo to accomplish something of their own. And they even referenced the fact that, he committed murder in Civil War that has not gotten forgotten, which is great. What were you guys' thoughts on the significance of all that and bringing in characters from Wakanda to the show? I thought that was awesome.
Man, so at the point in the fight where Bucky snatches that pole off of the wall and basically throws it like a spear, I was like, definitely a nod back to Wakanda. Yeah. But, man, so I watched the episode twice. The first time I watched it, I was like, oh, those are Cameo beads. And then we get to the AO scene. I was like, this is amazing. And the second time I watched it, I immediately got sad because I was like, oh, man, this could have been T'Challa.
Mm-hmm.
God, that would have been great.
Do you think that it could have been? When was this filmed? Do you guys know?
it made plenty of sense for T'Challa to be in that scene. I don't know if that was ever the plan, but I mean, just the thought that it could have been him just made me sad.
Yeah.
But I do like how it's the same actress who was present in Civil War when Zemo killed King T'Chaka. So she was the perfect actress to pick because this is personal to her. Like, she may view not being able to save the king as a personal failure. So she probably requested this assignment. Like, oh, Zemo's out? I'm on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love how this entire show is literally like a soft sequel to Civil War. Between all the characters they're bringing back from that movie alone, it's great. It's like how WandaVision kind of felt like a sequel to Age of Ultron in a way. The follow-up, even though it's like 5 years later. And it's been great so far to see all these characters back, which I never thought would return. What about you, Jeff? What were your thoughts on the return of Ayo at the end of the show and her significance going forward?
I loved it. I you know, one of the things, I'm gonna start watching the movies before these series start, just to have certain things fresh in my head, or just read up just so that I know, because it impacts me subconsciously, because you know all the data's stored there, and it's like, oh, there's a reference. But for that, yeah, this guy, yeah, for your ultimate goal, for your mission, it makes practical sense, and I think removing emotion and all of that, it does make sense to break Zemo out and get closer to this super soldier mystery, right? But when you think about it from a geopolitical point of view, he killed the head of state of a country.
Yeah.
He killed a king. So him being allowed to be in a prison and avoid Wakandan punishments and Wakandan law, that's one thing. Like, that's the type of stuff that could start wars. Mm-hmm. But the fact that he's in jail, they let it rock, and then he's released. Oh yeah, no, that can't fly. And to your point, sending Ayo out there that was there when it happened, that was on the security detail, who may feel personal. This is a personal thing for her, because she may have felt unfulfilled. She may have felt like a failure after that happened, because she couldn't protect the king. The king died. Think about a Secret Service member who is on the detail when a president gets assassinated. Yeah. How do you feel? Like, your job is one of your jobs literally to jump in front of that bullet.
Which
and you didn't. Right. That's true. That's true. But yeah, y'all are hilarious. But yeah, like you know, I think this is another way to build on the storytelling that you've told throughout 20 plus movies. These storylines can be picked up and woven into different series where they matter, where they can be expanded upon, where different characters can be fleshed out and be able to tell their parts of the story, and it just adds to it. So when kind of like Phil, right, when I saw the beads, I was like, it was funny because I looked at it and I said, I know where those are from, but I can't put my finger on it. And then I saw the other one and I was like, yo, it's like itching at the back of my head, like, yo, who is that? And then when I saw her, I was like, wow, those were Cameo beads. Wow. And now this is the part of the show where they're fighting wars on multiple fronts, because they're being searched for. Sam and Bucky. Basically, the government is looking for them. Two governments now, Wakanda and the U.S. government, along with all of the underworld. And they're all trying to find the super soldier serum. So it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with that going forward. But yeah, I was hyped for it.
Yeah, and that was great. It was the perfect cliffhanger for the next episode. Was there anything else from this episode, guys, that we haven't covered yet that stood out to you?
Yeah, actually one thing that stood out to me, other than the fact that I had to do a double take because I thought Carly's right-hand man was Mustafa Ali for a second.
Yes.
He had that top knot and that beard, and I was like, wait, is that? No. And then he talked, I was like, okay, it's not him. Yeah, she crossed a line this episode. Like, she didn't just take supplies. They blew up that building and killed all those soldiers, which clearly got to her right-hand man.
Yeah.
Like, he did not look like he was comfortable with that decision, and she did not tell him in advance. So we're starting to see her. I think the loss of that woman who died of tuberculosis, who's holding the little necklace of their symbol, like, I think that is pushing her over the edge, and she's going to start to... Because originally she was a sympathetic villain, right? She's giving medical supplies to refugees, and she's, you know, doing things for the people. But now she's becoming a terrorist activist.
Mm-hmm.
So they're starting to make her less sympathetic, which is going to make it a little more palatable when she eventually dies or gets arrested. But yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting that they had her... Like, they gave her 3 or 4 really nice scenes where, you know, she's talking about wanting to be a teacher. She's crying over her friend or sister, whoever that's supposed to be. And then, boom, blows up a building.
Before that scene, what I was kind of wondering was, do you think, maybe not the full-on everyone in the Flag Smashers, but do you think they could make some sort of a face turn and we come to find out that they're not actually the bad guys after all, and they're just it's just that they're being teased as the bad guys?
I think maybe that dude who looked a little uncomfortable might have a change of heart at some point and either turn on her, or, like, he'll try to leave and she'll kill him because, you know, she can't have anyone out there with that information.
Yeah.
You know, something like that. But I feel like her doing that is officially setting them on the villain path that they weren't originally on.
Yeah, well, I just say that because we go back to what we saw in the last episode, and I know we discussed this with the vaccine stuff. I know we're like, no way that shit is actual vaccines, and it's probably mislabeled, blah, blah, blah. But what if it was, and they were just trying to help out some people who needed it? That was like my first thought. And then I guess after the blow-up scene, I was like, okay, maybe, never mind, I guess. Maybe they're just assholes after all.
Yeah, and I think one thing this series, and really with the whole Captain America line of movies and shows, one thing it highlights is bad and evil and good is all a matter of perspective. Sharon has that conversation with Sam and Bucky, telling them, you know, this superhero stuff is bullshit, right? Like, it's not bullshit. There are no heroes. It's just who they want to make a villain at the right time. Because you think about it, the Avengers and all those heroes saved the world, but some people could look at them and say, well, would these aliens have come to Earth if y'all weren't around? Yeah. And then and you know, would our family, would my mother, would my brother, would my uncle, would my best friend have been here for the last 5 years if y'all didn't go and be discovered and bring all this heat on us? You know, the collateral damage that happens from superhero fights, you really don't get that perspective. You get it in Homecoming. You get a certain parts of it. You get it a little bit in WandaVision, but this is just overall with the superhero universe, Marvel, DC, whatever. You sometimes gloss over the effect of the heroes on regular everyday people and the worlds that they inhabit. And even with this espionage, dealing with governments, destabilization, one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. It's all a matter of who's controlling the propaganda. And you see it where there's very few people in that series whose hands are completely clean. Mm-hmm. And once Sam broke Zemo out, his hands aren't clean either. Because if I'm Wakanda, I'm like, Sam, really?
Sam didn't agree with it. Yeah, Sam had nothing to do with that. I would say he should not take any blame for that.
Right, but he didn't send Zemo back to jail.
But yeah,
you're complicit. You're riding in the car with the coke in the trunk. You might not have wanted to take the ride, but there's coke in the trunk. So what's up?
Yeah,
you're like, I'll just get dropped off. It's nothing. But now we're pulled over. Some of this crack is on your hands. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just what it is.
Yeah. Man. But see, I think that's what makes this episode so interesting. I think this episode made the point of putting Sam out of his element and putting him in Zemo and Winter Soldier's world. And I think like the first 2 episodes are all them attempting to operate in kind of the same way that Steve would. And I feel like this episode kind of explicitly points out, like, I wouldn't be surprised by the end of this series that Bucky ends up going off the grid and basically working in the same way that Sharon is doing right now. Because I believe Sharon's a double agent. That's my guess. So I wouldn't be surprised if they end up working off the grid together, or if he ends up taking notes from what she's doing and working off the grid. Because this whole episode shows that he's not a character that works well either working alongside the government or working as the face of anything. Like, he's not the face of an organization. He's not an Avenger. And I think the fact that Sam is so uncomfortable in what they're doing just shows, like, Sam is not like them. He doesn't belong there. He belongs as the face. He belongs on the Avengers. Mm-hmm. So I think all of that stuff was basically explicitly spelled out for us. So when I saw people's takes online of, oh, well, this makes Sam look, incompetent or like a side character. That's how you're supposed to feel in this episode, because he doesn't know what he's getting into. And he's kind of looking around like, guys, what are we doing? We shouldn't be here. Like, that was the whole purpose of this episode. And I think people miss that commentary here. I also think it's interesting that they basically went out of their way to go, well, Zemo's not racist, right? Because they made several points in this episode where it's like, well, he's not like Red Skull. So it's kind of lulling you to sleep. Like, no, he's not the bad guy, but he still is kind of a bad guy. And we saw that when he killed Nagel, who was the doctor from the miniseries that Isaiah Bradley came from. Like, he's the mastermind behind that.
He made reference to that too when he said that, the U.S. government came to me and they had a usable sample, and then later on Falcon specifically name drops Isaiah as that sample.
Yeah, he called him a test subject. And he also, I couldn't tell if he was making reference to the Hulk there, because he was like, no jacked up bodies, or
yeah, that could also be a reference to the fact that Steve, his body got changed quite a bit, but Carly's and her friends haven't.
Yeah, and I mean, in the Truth book, Isaiah Bradley is one of the few test subjects that didn't get deformed by the serum as well. And I mean, that could be, a nod to that as well. I'm not sure. But yeah, I also think the part of the whole reason Zemo is staying close to them is like, yeah, oh, you guys know where super soldiers are. Okay, well, let me find you, while he's loading his gun. Like, yeah, I mean, he's definitely going to kill several members of the Flag Smashers, because he doesn't want super soldiers to exist. His whole reason is like, yeah, we're not going to shut them down. He plans to kill them.
Right.
Yeah.
Man, what's he gonna do when he finds out about New Asgard? They'll fuck him up if he tries to go do anything there.
Yeah, but yeah, there's so many things that they basically said without saying in this episode. Especially when Sam talks about destroying the shield and that whole conversation. Like, there's so much that you can read from there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. No, they do a great job of the subtle commentary, not just with this episode, but again, every episode so far, all 3 of them. So, like I said, it's crazy to think that it's already halfway over. We only have 3 episodes to go. It wraps up in 2 weeks from now, or 2 or 3 weeks from now, I guess. And then we don't have another show until Loki comes out in June, and then Black Widow in July. So a lot to look forward to. I thought this was a great episode. I agree with you guys. It was definitely the best yet. And looking forward to next week. So as we wind down here, any other thoughts that we haven't covered yet that you guys want to throw out there?
Just that I think the funniest part of the episode was right after the lab blows up and they're all running outside. And Bucky's like, wait for my signal. And Sam just runs out. And then they get into an argument about it, and Sam just like, it's in every action movie.
Yeah.
Like, the bickering that they have with those two is one of the best parts of the show. Phil, I think you were the one who made the comparison with Lethal Weapon. Like, they really do have a Riggs
so
and
close to
Murtaugh.
Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, but and then Sharon, like, she had 10 times more personality in this episode than she did in any of her previous Marvel appearances. And I love how Bucky goes like, oh, great, she's terrible now. or something something like that, where like he did not like her snarky comebacks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she was only really the girl next door that lived next to Steve that made out with him that one time that just so happened to be doing her laundry in one of the scenes. It's honestly all that I remember of her from those original movies, so I'm glad she has much more of a defined role this time around. I thought she was awesome, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she does in the remainder of the season, too. So, yeah, this was great, guys. Always a good time. Chris, you're on the Twitter machine at BR_Doctor. Phil, you're on the Twitter machine at PhilDL616. And Jeff, thanks for joining us, dude. You're on the Twitter machine at JeffJSays. Thanks for joining us for another awesome time as always.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. This was dope.
And hopefully the next time we have you on, we can talk about Godzilla and Kong, too.
Yes. The night 3 of WrestleMania, it should highlight. If there was a third night, the Raw after Mania, we need Godzilla and Kong as the main event.
I completely agree. This has been great, guys. Thanks so much.
Yep.